Hello, everyone, and welcome to Economics and You. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson. Today, we are going to be looking at financing world trade. How does our currency work within this system of global trade? First, we're going to look at currency exchange rates to better understand that. Now, the value of two nations' currencies are different. Okay, dollar is not worth the same as the yuan, the pound, the euro, the peso. These all have slightly different values. And when exchanging dollars for a foreign currency, it's important to know the value of each of those currencies. If we don't know that a dollar is worth 95 cents in Canada, then we don't really know what our dollar can purchase. We don't have a clear understanding of the value of items within Canada. We need to exchange our money into their currency to purchase goods over there, and knowing our values helps make sure that that exchange happens the way we want it to. Now, currency exchanges allow business and people to engage in this sort of foreign trade. By exchanging our money into their money, they get what they need out of the exchange, and so do we. Now, throughout history, we've kind of had fixed exchange rates and floating exchange rates. From 1945 until 1970s, the fixed rate is how we went. That is, every nation established what the exchange rate was between the two. And if you went to Canada, a Canadian dollar cost the same number of American dollars in 1945 as it did in 1970. It was a fixed rate. These rates didn't change, but the problem was inflation and other factors were changing the actual value of that money. So the principles of supply and demand were not put into practice, and we had kind of an imbalance in currencies because of this fixed rate. Now, as real currency values changed, it becomes really difficult to find out what is a fair trade and what is not a fair trade, because we don't actually know what the value of a US dollar is when compared to a peso in Mexico. We just have this fixed number, but what does that number really reflect? So instead, we flipped to a flexible exchange rate in the early 1970s. The flexible exchange rate better reflects the real value of money. Now, how do we know what the real value of money is? Well, this is economics. It's supply and demand. Supply and demand helps us understand the value of any goods. This is how we get to our equilibrium prices and our real market prices of things. We find out how much is out there and how much people want it, and we've come upon this fixed price. Now, for example, if Mexico has high inflation, okay, inflation in Mexico has gone wild. They have printed way too much currency. The value of pesos drops. Now, people who are trying to save money, they don't want to see the value of their savings completely disappear. They don't want to keep their savings in pesos. And so they go to a currency market and they buy dollars. That is, they sell off all of their pesos and they buy as many US dollars as they can. Now, the peso is crashing. Now, all of a sudden, demand for the dollar is going through the roof. Mexicans are buying a whole bunch of pesos. And we know through the law of supply and demand that if demand is increasing, price is increasing. More people want those dollars, so the price of those dollars is going to increase. And we see this exchange rate reflecting that as dollars slowly become more and more expensive as more and more people want them. Now, currency devaluation can happen because of inflation, but can also happen because of government policies. We're not going to get into the details of those policies today, but it is important for us to understand in the concept of trade and in the discussion around trade that the devaluation of currency actually has a positive side effect for that nation. When a currency loses value, but wages in that country are not increasing, a nation actually has a trade advantage. They're not paying their workers anymore. The good, though, they can decrease the actual cost of that good in a foreign market. And remember, if prices go down, foreign demand for that product is going to increase. So they can produce a good at a lower cost than their trade partners. We see this in China. China has been devaluing their currency. That is forcing the value of their currency down when compared to the US dollar. This lower cost currency means that they can produce goods at a lower cost. They can sell goods at a lower cost, and they can outprice their competitors here in the United States. With lower prices, demand for those Chinese goods has then increased. So China is selling a whole bunch of goods at a lower cost, but the volume is making up for the lower cost, and therefore seeing greater profits for Chinese companies, lower costs for us US consumers, but also US manufacturing jobs disappearing. This has created what some have called a currency war, that a trade war between the United States and China is looming because China keeps forcing down the value of its currency to attract American manufacturing jobs. Also, this type of trade has created a trade imbalance. Devalued currency, especially in China, has created an opportunity where we are buying far more goods than China is buying from us. China produces goods at such a low cost that American companies simply cannot compete. So American companies shut down, we purchase goods from China, and the balance of trade gets way out of whack. This is U.S. trade surplus and deficits as reflected by GDP. And we can see where we used to have a trade surplus as much as a 1% GDP surplus. We now flirt with -5 to maybe even -6 GDP. That is buying a whole bunch more foreign goods than we are exporting. This is especially true with China. China doesn't buy nearly as many American goods as we buy of theirs. This is a large trade imbalance. That trade imbalance, of course, causes a trade deficit, and the U.S. has a fairly large trade deficit. That deficit is, of course, the difference between imports and exports. This is the amount of goods that we are importing from other countries. These are the amount of goods that we are exporting from other goods. Here we see the Great Recession. That's this part right here. The whole global economy slowed down and then bounced back up. But we can see it here in imports and exports, with the difference between the two being our deficit. Our trade deficit decreases our GDP. Okay, it's important to know our gross domestic product goes down the bigger this deficit is, but not necessarily our quality of life. We can buy many items for lower costs because of what China is doing. So we don't like it because it takes away American manufacturing jobs. This lowers our GDP. We don't like it because this trade imbalance lowers our GDP as well. But when we go to Walmart and we see all those goods on the shelves that are way cheaper than they should be, well, it kind of makes us happy to buy goods at a low cost. Just understand, this is why. It's because of our trade imbalance. It's because China is depreciating its currency, Chinese labor costs are very low, and manufacturing jobs are moving from the United States to China so they can produce all of those low-cost goods. All right, that's all for today on the finance of trade. I hope you learned something, and farewell.